As with the Allies, the Axis powers put great precedent on tanks during World War II. Obviously, Germany's tank program could warrant several videos by themselves, but today I want to do an overview of tanks from Italy and Japan as well. Starting with Italy, we need to talk with the L335 Tankette. It was light, at just 3.5 tons, and covered in thin, easily pierceable armor. Its 26 mph speed on roads was passable, but nothing when considering its weight. Surprisingly, this vehicle spawned several successors and redesigns, but the rest of the vehicles in the L3 series weren't particularly successful either. These tiny tanks may not have had, well, anything on their side, but they still fight every chance they could get. As Italy developed successors to the L3 series, they developed a full light tank, the Fiat L640, boasting the same speeds as the L335, but with over twice the weight, 7.5 tons. This was definitely a superior option to its predecessor in battle. This and the L3 series had flamethrower models that did exactly what you'd expect. It was short, at 6'8", which gave it an almost stealthy edge in battle when surrounded by brush, but overall it was not an amazing tank by any means. Definitely an improvement over the Tankette though, but that's not saying much. If you remember back to the interwar video, I discussed the Vickers 6-ton. Turns out Italy enjoyed this tank so much they based the M11 on its design, with a very similar track structure, suspension system, but not its speed. The M1139 was the first medium tank in Italy's World War II arsenal, but again, it was not so good. 20 mph on road made it laughably slow for the time. It was prone to breaking down. The armor wasn't great either, and it made the vehicle pretty much worse than the Allies' alternatives in every way. Not content with these designs, I wonder why, the Fiat M1340 was designed to function as the #1 tank for Italy's war effort. The 14-ton weight of the vehicle solidified it as a medium tank, albeit a very light one, and it had enough firepower to take out Britain's lighter tanks. Its 20 mph speed on the road wasn't particularly great, which may have been the vehicle's greatest flaw. It maintained a modest legacy of battle nonetheless, but then again the Italians didn't have too many alternatives, so I suppose that was a given. Italy wasn't entirely done yet, and they continued with the M1441. It was similar to the M13, although it had a better engine. The tank was possibly the worst of the bunch though, as it suffered from several major issues. The vehicle itself had better armor, but maintained the body of an M13, meaning there was very little space within the tank for the soldiers. It lacked reliability, adding to frustrations with the vehicle, and possibly most important, it would burst into flames when shot, making it less than optimal for those who desired to live. Italy didn't give up on this abysmal effort and continued to the M1542. They wanted a heavy tank to be produced, but this seemed a bit too far away, so production began on this. It wasn't nearly as bad as the previous efforts, but within the North African campaign, the Allied forces were using rather heavy tanks that this medium-sized vehicle couldn't significantly harm. The 25 mph speed is better than Italy's previous vehicles, but considering how late into the war this was, it was pretty lackluster. Italy made a good decision developing the M15 before its heavy tank effort, as the heavy tank wouldn't be ready to make a difference in the war. Named the P40, it still maintained medium tank classification, reaching over 28 tons, but was definitely the largest of its kind for the Italians. Moving on to Japan, let's start with Japan's most popular tank of the war, the Type 97 Chiha. Designed in 1936, it would lack specs of more advanced tanks during the war, but managed to remain a threat with its low height and moderate armor protection. Its 24 mph speed was impressive considering it was a medium tank designed so much earlier than that of the other vehicles, and it was powered by a Mitsubishi engine. The tank still did have other major flaws though. Border conflicts between the Soviet Union and Japan led to the battles of Konkan Gol, in which the Japanese Type 97s were destroyed due to insufficient firepower compared to their Soviet counterparts. This convinced the Japanese army to create the Type 97 Kai, with a more improved gun. This was successful, as even older Type 97s were given the more powerful turret. Japan's direct successor to this was the Type 1 Chihei. It made the vehicle larger, supporting an additional soldier. This was supplemented with an increased engine power along with better armor. The limitations of the Type 97 Chiha led to yet another increase in firepower, making this medium a formidable opponent, or it would have been, but it never saw battle. An increase in steel demand for warships limited production, and eventually the project saw 170 tanks developed, but none of them actually fought in combat. The 17-ton vehicle had a speed of 27 mph, This max speed would have made it one of the quicker tanks of the war, and the armor itself would have made it a rather powerful adversary for most Allied tanks. As the war progressed, Japan began fearing a potential American invasion of the country. At the time, the M4 Shermans were incredibly powerful forces that America would surely bring across the Pacific if such an event ever were to occur. In preparation, Japan began development on the M4 Sherman's equivalent for the Japanese army. The planned vehicle was the Type 4 Cheeto, but limitations meant production would be delayed. In this case, Japan developed the Type 3 Chinu. This vehicle maintained much of its Type 97 heritage while adding improvements to the turret along with a dome ceiling for the commander. The speed was slower than its predecessor, the Type 1, as it used the same engine but was heavier at 21 tons. Less than 200 were made, and none ever saw battle, but it definitely is interesting to see what the Type 97 would become. Finally, we have Japan's best tank to ever be produced, albeit with only 2 ever actually being made. The Type 4 Cheeto was very, very impressive. The 75mm armor made it one of the best armored tanks of the war. This brought its weight to a hefty 33 tons. Speed wasn't compromised though, and this tank could reach 28 miles per hour. The 75mm tank gun was a major asset, which only added to this tank's insane specs. Japan was worried about its enemies using the tanks against it once World War II was coming to a close, and threw both finished tanks in a lake. Eventually one was found, but the other remains lost in the lake. Moving on to the Type 5 Chiri, I know you thought that was the end, right? This tank was, look at it. No, really, just look at it. The final tank developed by Japan. It had the same speed as the Type 4, but weighed almost 41 tons. It was going to have the Type 4's 75mm gun, but that was boosted to 88mm, and a second turret was planned, although that was a smaller 37mm. Only one was ever made, and that was captured by the US and was tested. Nobody knows what happened in that one vehicle after though. Apparently this wasn't enough, and an even stronger version of the Type Find was planned, named the Horo, this time with a 105mm gun instead of the 75 or 88mm. No prototype exists for this. So there are some of the tanks of the Axis powers. Glad you enjoyed, see you next time. Oh, well, I seem to have forgot something. Look, Germany has a long tank history with the Panzer program, and I felt I should develop an entire episode to the German tanks of the war, detailing the history of the program and what final tanks were planned. Sorry about the delay, but I want to give this video the full time I think it deserves. Anyway, this is Cody of Knowledge Hub.